Hi, delighted to be here today with Gemma Milne. Gemma, you and I sit down for conversations, and usually I strap myself in and we go off on all over the place for an hour, and it's fantastic fun. How would you describe yourself? Who would you say you are and what you do?
Yeah, this is a question I always really struggle to answer, to be honest. At the moment, I say that I'm a writer. Okay. I think that is predominantly what I am. But I do lots of different things, everything from public speaking to consulting to working with startups to podcasting to writing. And really what I'm interested in is science technology broadly, but probably a better way of describing it is I'm really interested in how the world works. Okay. And sometimes that means thinking about it in a business sense, sometimes that means thinking about it from a more sort of pretentious philosophical sense, and sometimes that means just us working through some kind of weird strategy that we're trying to work out.
So at what point did you start seeing that overall, kind of looking at it from all angles, I suppose, because most of us, we work much more in our box in terms of linearly down a certain path, whereas in our conversations and everything I know about you, and kind of, if you get an idea, you're looking across the whole spectrum of all different angles.
Sure. I mean, I suppose probably I think it's always been in me. I'm quite curious, and I've never really was able to work out what it is I was interested in. You know, at school it was like, I really want to be an artist, but I also want to be a mathematician. And, you know, genuinely had that whole right brain, left brain, which is not a real thing anyway, discussion with teachers. But I think when it really sort of turned into a career was when I was made redundant, because before then I always had a headline. I always say, you know, I was, you know, an investment banker, or I was, you know, tech innovation strategist at Ogilvy. And when I'd introduced myself, it was very much like, this is what I do and this is who I am. But when you get made redundant and then someone says, who are you and what you're interested in, suddenly you're like, oh, I don't have something to say anymore, so I got to think a bit more broadly about who it is that I am. And that sounds a little pretentious, but I think it also came from the fact that after being made redundant, I did lots and lots of different kinds of jobs. I've always done different kinds of jobs, but I suppose I melded it, I turned it into a career instead of doing one thing and then something totally different afterwards. It was like, how can I do many things at the same time and sort of craft a career that makes sense for me? And I suppose following my nose in terms of what I'm interested in. But really it comes from having conversations with such a broad spectrum of people. You know, I will have as much fun talking to, you know, a nuclear physicist as I will a linguist, as I will someone who does door-to-door sales, because I just always fascinated by how things work regardless of what they are.
And I think kind of one of the big things for me always has been that when you're talking to the nuclear physicist or talking to kind of the mathematical genius or this one or that one of the things that in society I fear is we're scared of asking questions, of being made to look stupid. Is that something that just has never bothered you?
No, I don't mind being stupid at all. I've always asked the silly questions. I mean, well, I was a kid in school that like put their hands up all the time, and I was fortunate in the sense that I was, you know, I got good marks at school and so on and so forth, so I didn't really feel worried about asking a question, because I knew if I was asking it, someone else probably was having the same question. Okay. But no, I mean, I'd much rather understand something. I get really annoyed if I don't get it. I think that's why I studied maths, because it's all about trying to like get it at a really fundamental level. Yeah. So when I'm talking to someone and they tell me something, I don't really care if I suppose I'm confident enough in my own abilities that it doesn't matter that I don't know their world. I know that I'll know something else better than them. So I suppose I don't try not compare, but I love just asking really silly questions.
So, and do you think you are kind of, we read a lot, we hear a lot kind of in terms of people having multidisciplinary careers and moving to like broad spectrum, and kind of everything you just described means that you're leading the vanguard of this whole thing. Does this mean there needs to be a shake-up kind of in terms of how we are positioned and taught at school in terms of actually what do you want to be? I want to be a doctor. Whereas actually it's more important you're curious.
I mean, I think you need both. I don't think the world would function if it was just all folk like me. I mean, I'm not a very good manager, for instance, and my patience is sometimes is not quite there. So I don't think we'd have a very good functioning society if, in the same way that I don't think we'd have a good functioning society if we didn't have people like me. Kind of, I suppose I'm a bit of a connector. I mean, I was having a conversation this morning with someone actually about, she studied linguistics and I studied mathematics, and at the moment I'm researching an article about translation, and you know, we were going through stuff and I said to her, I was like, I'm so angry that I didn't get interested in English. I used to hate English at school, you know. I'm so angry that I didn't take an interest in this, and you know, I went to university in Scotland where in your first year you get like 6 modules and only one of them has to be your major, and you can take anything else. And I didn't, go and take an elective in philosophy or go and try something completely different. I was very, maths, physics, economics. And, I kind of regret that. But at the same time, now I'm getting a much larger appreciation for the humanities, mainly because I'm allowing myself to go and have a look around. Before I felt like I couldn't. I kind of had to, if you want to be a science and tech writer, you should only read science books and tech books and so on and so forth. And luckily that's, in the last few years particularly, I suppose I've given myself a bit more permission to kind of, no, you're interested in that, go and look at it and make it part of your career. It's not just a hobby, you can bring that element into something you're doing as opposed to it just being something you do at the weekend. But then equally I do think that that's a real privilege of having the type of career that I do. I know that not everyone can just wander off and read a book about linguistics and somehow find a way to monetize it and turn it into an article. So I don't know.
So from your perspective, where do you start? Do you start with a thought or?
Normally a question. It's normally something that I don't know the answer to that I think is a bit weird. And I'll ask a few people and there's a non-obvious answer or people don't know the answer.
Yeah.
So like for instance, at the moment, I'm really interested in the Dewey Decimal System, which is how you categorize books in libraries for anyone who doesn't know what that is. And it's like a numerical system. So it's like a numerical system. So you have the 0 books are like computer science books, and then the 1 books will be language books. Yeah. The 5 books or the 4 books are science, I think. And linguistics, I think, is 7 because we were looking at it this morning. Anyway, you go in and it's say 500 are the science books, and then you split science into physics, chemistry, so on and so forth. So it'll be 5-1 will be physics, 5-2 chemistry, so on and so forth. And I found recently, because I downloaded the Dewey Decimal app, because that's the sort of thing I'll do, and I found that 500 up to 503, so 500, 501 is all there, but 504 is missing, and then there's 505. So I was like, where's 504? Because you'll have something like pure mathematics is 503, and then 505 is applied mathematics. And you're like, well, what's in between that? Why isn't there? And so I asked a few people really quickly, nobody knew why. And when I Googled it, there was something weird about certain codes are not allowed to be used by anyone, and then others, librarians, it's at their discretion or something. And I was just I don't know, I kind of got this idea in my head of what does it mean to reassign knowledge? If something's known to be true and you put it in a certain category, what makes it change? So say for instance 504, maybe there was something about the science of God. And then when they realised that, well, that's not science, you put it in the religion, maybe they moved the code. I don't know. But anyway, that's a question I have at the moment that I'm still to find the answer to, and maybe that'll turn into an article, maybe that's just something I'll think about in my head, maybe that's something I'll bring up in a conversation like this. And it's the same as the translation one that started with the question of how do you translate a made-up word in between books. So I was reading a fantasy book and the character was called Bolog, and it was originally a German book, and I was like, I wonder if the character was called Bolog in German as well as in English because of the way it evokes feelings. So it's very much I don't know, I suppose I'm a bit weird, I just kind of find lots of things really fascinating.
But then do you then take that information, what do you do with the information that you've...
Well, sometimes
do you try and relate, I suppose the question is, do you try and relate it into something which is more tangible for...
Sometimes. It's not always so intentional, I suppose, it kind of just comes. A lot of the time I kind of just Google it to try and find the answer, but normally it'll... as it does with anyone, you kind of goes in the back of your head, and then, you'll be randomly talking to a startup about how they tell people about their science, and you'll be like, oh, translating science, that's similar to translating fantasy or something, how do you evoke a feeling? And I don't know, I suppose I get really excited when I see a really weird link, and sometimes I'll say the link and, I don't know, I'll say to my boyfriend, he's like, that's not linked at all, but in my head it makes sense, and I suppose I get really excited when I can, regardless of the situation I'm in, if I can tie different things together, if I can be like, oh, there's this weird economics textbook I read years ago and that's linked to this nuclear physics thing, or it's linked to some TV show that someone's just watched. I'm not really good on popular culture, to be fair, probably better than the other stuff, but I don't know, I kind of get excited when I'm able to link things together.
So what would you judge for yourself, kind of a success, or where you turn around and say, I've said I've achieved what I want to set out to do?
Well, when I manage to get what's in my head in your head somehow, if I can, whether it's an idea or a piece of advice or something I've read that I think is really exciting. I love like telling people things that I find exciting.
Yeah.
Like my mum never understood my fascination with maths, and she still doesn't. And I suppose it's my like.
I saw how you clenched your
yeah, it's like I feel like it's like my life dream to try and get her to understand why Euler's theorem is like the most beautiful theorem. That one day, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's. I like when people get the. It sounds so pretentious, but like. I find myself very lucky getting to feel awe and wonder and like have these kind of conversations. And so if you can bring that into someone's life in some way, whether it's their job or their hobbies or whatever, it's a great privilege to me, you know.
So going back to where we started in terms of how you describe yourself, and you say you describe yourself as currently as an author.
Writer, not quite an author yet.
Sorry, a writer, my apologies. But almost you're doing yourself a disservice. So you're not like a philosopher, you're not like a modern day thinker or kind of,
I mean,
because you're just bringing ideas out.
I suppose so, but for me it feels pretentious to say it. And I maybe it's me just overthinking it, and I probably sound pretentious in everything I'm saying to an extent, or at least what I consider to be pretentious.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think it's from when I worked in corporate innovation, I found it really annoying someone using the word futurist. I found it really, I don't know why, there was some sort of feeling of, you know when you really like a band before everyone else does, and then everyone starts to like the band, and you're like, I liked them before you guys, and it really, there's like a weird annoying thing. Yes. I think I have that with futurists and with people, because I feel like there's somehow like monetizing or making real something that a lot of people already know, and people that are maybe more qualified, and maybe that's my own insecurity coming out.
But isn't it the fact that these people, they have the capacity to relate to people who don't understand and be able to explain to them?
Yeah, but then I would call them communicators or journalists or writers. A futurist, I feel like it's like nobody can predict the future. Yeah. So I feel like it's too much of a title. And I think philosopher feels, I mean, what qualification do you need to be a philosopher? I don't know. I mean, there's probably, you can go have a philosophy degree, but I'm not sure that makes you a philosopher.
It's not a philosopher someone who is naturally curious and actually asking questions.
I mean, if that's
challenging.
If that's a definition, then yeah, okay, you can call me a philosopher. But I'm not sure that's a definition. Is that a definition of philosopher?
I have no idea what.
I don't know. I suppose I think I would find myself. Maybe it's because I'm Scottish. I don't know. We tend to. There's a thing about not being above yourself, or like there's a sort of culture thing around that, and I think maybe it feels too unlike my background. I don't know, like it just feels, I would hate to call myself I've been called futurist when I've gone on stage to do things, and like I'm not, if people want to introduce it and that makes sense at the conference, that's fine by me, but it doesn't make my insides go a bit like, oh, that's not.
But I'm just fascinated because I think kind of we're in a time whereby there are no definitive answers, and there's kind of there is only questions and only kind of ideas that are going around, and if you're someone who is as eloquent as you are discussing the thought process.
Yeah, I mean,
you're almost doing yourself a disservice by calling yourself a writer, because you're not. Because maybe. Actually, the process isn't actually the putting pen to paper. It's the stuff that's going on in your head beforehand.
Well, to be fair, I mean, this is actually something I was thinking about a lot this morning. Was isn't the most impactful people the ones that can expertly express what's in their head? I mean, everyone has interesting ideas, everyone has thoughts, everyone has a book in them, like everyone is thinking things. I'm no better a thinker than other people, we just think in different ways. So really in my mind, a mark of a person who's managed to create impact is how they get it out. And I suppose for me that's maybe why I have more respect for the idea of a writer or an author, because that person's managed to process something and then put it down in a way that other people can kind of tap into it. And I suppose it's also why I sometimes struggle to call myself a writer, because I'm like, oh, I haven't managed to properly get that thought out of my head. It makes sense in here and it's exciting, but I mean, I wouldn't want to call myself a speaker, but I'm actually, I think, best at speaking my ideas as opposed to writing them. But I know that I can be most impactful, or it makes more of, it's more useful in the world if you put pen to paper. And, you know, in some ways I'm like, you know, I'm writing this book at the moment, and I'm quite relieved a little bit about the fact that I'm doing that, because once I'm done I can just say I'm an author and I don't need to worry about what that means anymore. I'm like, I've got a book, that means I'm definitely an author, and you know, people can interpret that as philosopher, writer in their own head, and I don't need to do that. So yeah.
So tell me, are there any questions or thoughts that you've had where you haven't been able to work it through in your head, or is there something out there that you'd like to spend time?
I mean, I'm thinking a lot at the moment about how much information should you put out into the world in order to affect it in a positive way. So when you think about science, technology, think about AI, for instance, we got people too excited about AI and it caused an investment winter. Investors got really excited, put a lot of money in, and then it didn't develop at the pace that they expected, and then they took the money out and it caused issues. And we see this happening with various different technologies at the moment. It kind of looks like that's happening with quantum computing. And I'm been thinking a lot about how much information should you give out about science and technology, because on one hand I'm all for open science, getting all information out the lab, translating it so everyone can understand it, sort of perfect information as it were. But we can't possibly do that. It's impossible to do perfect. We can't possibly translate everything into everyone's head and them to understand it. So if you kind of get it slightly wrong, you run the risk of someone misinterpreting and then making a wrong decision. So for instance, if you put out a lot of information about vaccines, for instance, and people get the wrong idea about what scientific method is and how it's fallible, but doesn't mean it's wrong and all that sort of thing. So then it's like, well, do you give no information and you only give it to decision makers? But then obviously you have things like Brexit, for instance, where, should we have just given it to politicians because we trust them versus perfect information to the masses? So I'm kind of interested. Before I was very much, we should, translate all of science, we should translate all of knowledge and everything. Everyone has the right to understand things, but I've been thinking a lot about what does that mean in terms of like effect on the world and responsibility. I think a lot about responsibility of futurists.
Yeah.
If you put like a listicle out about like top 10 technologies, who's making are businesses, countries, like who's making decisions based on that, and what's the repercussion?
And are those questions based on kind of almost a maturity coming, or are they based on a fear?
For me, probably it comes from just thinking about it a bit more, because it's been at the root of the research for this book, and kind of realizing that at the root of all these questions, are electric cars good or bad, it really comes down to morals and not your understanding of technology, and realizing that nuance is actually much more important than true understanding.
But earlier on you said you like maths because
it's right or wrong and it zooms in.
So how does that balance up in your head about nuance?
Because maths is perfect. That's the thing. The idea with maths is you're trying to zone in to the kind of lowest, most pure point. You're going down to does 2 actually plus 2, does it actually equal 4? And going into these axioms, these assumptions we've made about the world, and then we kind of build up off the back of it. That's why mathematicians hate economists, because economists, they make a lot of assumptions that in a perfect world, this does this. And it's like, well, we know that the world doesn't actually work like that. So that's why we also, mathematicians find biology really hard, because biology is super messy and it's really hard to quantify. So yes, in some sense, I think that's why it's maybe fascinating me so much at the moment, because I used to I hated chaos theory, I hated any form of statistics. When I was at uni, I was like, no, I studied pure maths, what makes a prime number, and all these sorts of questions. And now I'm like, how does nuance work in the world, and how do I start rethinking that? So maybe it's linked, I don't know, that's probably the first time I've thought about that. But I think there's beauty in trying to understand something at a perfect level, but I think that there's wisdom in understanding that nuance is actually how the world works. Maybe.
Gemma, I think on that note, that was a beautiful summary to everything. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your questions.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, absolutely.
Many chats.
Yeah, more coffees.